Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in to a new episode of Worlds Collide, the podcast where I talk to people who moved abroad. And this episode is about studying abroad. It's actually such a big topic about moving abroad in general. It's like the first step to dip your feet into a new place, kind of. And in this episode, my guest is Abby from the US. And she talks about why she wanted to study abroad and how it was for her. So we have recorded this episode a few months ago. That was before I watched the final season of The Crown, because otherwise I would have been familiar with the place she went to. Yeah, she went to St. Andrews in Scotland. Yeah, duh, me for not knowing the place. But now I do. And it sounds amazing. But also we talk about moving back to the US after being away for such a long time and how that experience was for her. And Abby has a YouTube channel called Political Psych with Abby, and you will find the link in my show notes. But here is the interview. Hi Abby, how are you today?
I'm good, and you?
I'm good too. Thank you for being on my podcast. Where are you from originally?
So I'm originally from a suburb of Boston,
Uh-huh.
in Massachusetts in the US.
Okay, but you want to talk about your time in the UK.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So when I was 18, I moved to St. Andrews, Scotland to go to college.
Okay. Where is St. Andrews?
It's like an hour and a bit from Edinburgh. It's on the
Okay.
coast.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's this really beautiful medieval town with it's got a really old university, and it's got like a ruined castle and a
Mm-hmm.
cathedral, and it's and cliffs overlooking the ocean. It's just gorgeous.
It sounds like Scotland, like how you imagine it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
storybook pretty. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And why did you choose Scotland?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I think it's more that I chose the university, right? Because I was doing the standard college application process.
Mm-hmm.
And I did apply some places in the US too, actually a lot of places. I probably applied to too many places.
Oh, okay.
But I also did the thing they have in the UK where you apply to 5 universities and you only have to do like one fee and take, I don't know, there's not even an additional test. They take like your AP scores instead of your A levels, which is what it would be if you were British.
Mm-hmm.
Um and there's a whole bunch of other stuff. I applied to Oxford too, and there's a whole bunch of extra stuff for Oxford and Cambridge, but we don't have to get into that.
Okay.
And I'd been given advice by a now unfortunately former friend of my mother's.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that he basically said, like, when I was in high school, he was like, okay, you're really intellectually curious, you have these good test scores and you write good essays, but your grades aren't totally perfect, and like it varies a lot subject to subject,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And UK universities, they want you to be well rounded, but they don't expect you to be as like perfectly well rounded, good at every subject as American
Okay.
universities, right?
Uh-huh. Okay.
Um, Also, my mom's a professor here in the US,
Ah, uh-huh.
and I wanted to go somewhere where she wouldn't know people and where I wasn't, because I
Right.
was already a little bit jaded to the American university system, even at 18,
Mm.
because I had grown up around universities, right?
Okay.
Um, and obviously, coming from the Boston area, there are so many universities around there. I didn't apply anywhere within 300 miles of Boston, basically. Like, I think the
Okay.
closest place I applied was like Virginia. Um,
Uh-huh.
and so the UK, it was like, yay, I get to go far and experience something totally different and get to have an adventure. And uh, it depends on where in the US and if I had had a scholarship. But for me, it definitely didn't end up being like a worse financial decision to go there.
Yeah, I guess.
It went
And
better.
nobody knew your mother.
No, actually, no. There was like one professor in a totally different department who had worked with my mother, but like
Okay.
Like, my undergrad was psychology and modern history, and my mom's a physicist, so,
Okay.
like, I
It
had
does.
lunch with this woman, like, a couple times, and she was super nice, and I had a tough time my freshman year, and she helped me settle in and everything, so it was actually good that she was there, but, like, she absolutely wasn't one of my professors or anything, but it was funny that there was still someone who knew my mom. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, but no, it was a wonderful experience, so that's sort of why I moved to the UK, and then I stayed in the UK for another year after undergrad. I was doing a master's in political psychology, um, and that one was more geographically nebulous because it was during the pandemic.
Okay.
Um,
Were they both right next to each other, or like
oh
or was
no.
it like a break when you went back to the US?
Oh, you mean in time. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I did go to the US for a little bit in the summer of 2020, which was really weird because, like, no one was traveling. Um,
Right. Yeah.
I was a US citizen with a UK visa, I could, and I had family to see and everything. But, yeah, so I went back for the summer, but I basically went straight into a master's after undergrad.
Okay. And so when you first came to Scotland, what was your reaction like? Because you just mentioned you kind of had a hard time in the beginning.
Yeah, so, I mean, I had been to Scotland before, and I had even been to St. Andrews before. Um, Being the kid of an academic, I got to travel a lot growing up, especially
Mhm.
in Europe. So I had been to St. Andrews when I was like 11, and then I had come back there again to like tour colleges. Um, so I knew the place okay. Um, and it wasn't like a huge culture shock moving to the UK from like the
Okay.
East Coast of the US, because
Mhm.
honestly, I think that there are parts of the US that are less like the East Coast, less like Boston than the UK is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Yeah.
I
Um,
think probably especially like on the East Coast, New England,
yeah.
you there are probably places where you can relate.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I did have a lot of trouble settling in my first year though, because I mean, it was the first time I had had to make like all new friends
Mm.
since I was like literally like 9 or 10 years old.
Right. Yes.
Um and I wasn't like a super happy person in middle or high school. Honestly, I was kind of a killjoy most of my childhood.
Okay.
Uh, and I had sort of been waiting for college for my life to really start and to really start enjoying things, and I put way too much pressure on myself to make all these friends and have all this fun just like immediately, where it sort of gave me this like existential crisis, and I had a series of panic attacks.
Oh, no, no. Oh, no.
Yeah, which was that was a total nightmare. So I mean, it's good that it was really good that my mom's friend was there because they had to bring me to the doctor's office
Okay,
where
sure.
she
You
needed
did
me.
not
Yeah,
know how that works. Probably
yeah,
completely different. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I hadn't really navigated anything medical on my own, right? Because I was like
Mm.
18.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so that was really difficult. I mean, honestly, I think I probably would have had the same experience or a very similar experience at basically any college, right?
Okay.
Like, I don't think it was really caused by being in the UK, if that makes sense.
Okay, so you would have had the same experience if you were in the US.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, I think maybe if I had gone to college, like, really close to my family, I would have had the option to, like, retreat to my family rather than, like, forcing myself to keep going, um,
Mhm.
but I'm glad that I forced myself to keep going, right, and that I couldn't just go home.
Yeah. And how
Uh,
long were you in Scotland for?
4 years.
For 4 years. That's quite a time.
Yeah, I mean, the issue with the panic attacks and stuff, like, that only went on for a couple months, like, by the end of my 1st semester, I was basically fine.
Okay. And you're
Yeah.
fully
Yeah, no, and
acclimatized.
I really loved living there and everything, and I went home for a lot of vacations and stuff, so it's not like I didn't see my family for 4 years.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you said there was not a lot of culture shock because you already went a few times before, but was it different living there than
Yeah.
visiting?
Oh, no, it's definitely different living somewhere than visiting somewhere. And one thing that's really funny to me is like a lot of people were like, "Oh, I get it. I've done a study abroad." And I'm like, "No, you did a semester surrounded by other like Americans. Like
Mm-hmm.
I lived a place, right? These are different." But not disparaging study abroads or whatever. I think that's like an awesome thing, but it's totally it's a
Yeah,
different
yeah, yeah.
um, yeah, so yeah, no, I mean there was some difference. I think that I mean it's tough because it was also like my first time really living independently, so it's
Right,
tough to say like which was from which, right?
right.
Um, but no, I mean there was definitely well one thing that I thought was really interesting is so British people are generally a little less outgoing than
Uh-huh.
Americans. Um, but they expect Americans to be outgoing.
Oh, okay.
So
Yes.
that kind of forced me out of my shell a little bit. And one thing that's sort of nice is if you're in a position where you are a foreigner, it's almost a little bit liberating because you can be a little bit weird and people will assume that it's a cultural thing rather than you just being like a total weirdo. Um,
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
um, so that was sort of good. And I guess the other things are like, I don't know, it wasn't so much like culture shock. I mean, I had to get used to like the grocery stores are way smaller, but I honestly like that better. Um
Mhm.
I guess I don't know. The food took some getting used to, but mostly it was the food in dorms that I didn't like. Like Scottish
Mhm.
food is actually okay, especially if you're in a place like St. Andrews because the ingredients are all really fresh, so it doesn't have
Okay.
to be that complicated because the food's very good quality.
Uh-huh.
But like if you're in a dorm, the food's horrible.
Okay. Well, maybe that's part of the
Especially if
dorm too.
yeah, I mean, especially if you're like me and like I don't eat at the time I just didn't eat beef, but like now I don't eat mammals at all.
Mhm.
And part of a lot of that is for health reasons, and I didn't necessarily have like the same health stuff at the time, but I've never been able to digest meat that well.
Mhm.
And so that was tough, honestly. It was like because
Was was there just, like, limited options?
yeah, very limited options.
Uh-huh.
Like in the dorms, there was usually maybe like one vegetarian option per meal, and there were 3 types of potatoes, and sometimes the vegetarian option would just be an additional type of potatoes.
Right, okay, so you had,
Or
like,
the vegetarian
4
option would
potato
involve
dishes on your
yeah,
plate.
or the vegetarian option would involve like a lot of beans, and I really don't like beans.
Oh, yeah, great. No.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. I guess that was sort of the main stuff. I guess, I mean, also, I mean, it was really nice to get to experience universal healthcare for the first time. Like
Mm.
that was a really big change. Not so much like culture shock, it's just like a really nice thing. It was almost more of a culture shock coming back to the US and having to deal
Uh,
with healthcare here.
yeah,
I'm very lucky in that my mom has very good health insurance from work and has had it my entire life.
yeah.
And, she would go with me to medical appointments when I was a child, right? So I didn't really have to deal with it so much
Mhm.
like when I was actually a kid. But then I moved back to the US when I was 23,
Mhm.
having never lived here full time as an adult and like having never really navigated the American healthcare system for myself.
Right.
And like here I am, I'm an adult, I have an American accent, I have no idea what's going on.
Uh-huh, yeah.
Uh, I took to having I think I mostly get it now, but, like, I had to explain to, like, people in medical offices, I was like, "Hey, I used to live in the UK, they do things totally differently, I don't know how to do your forms, please help me."
Right, right. Well, it's
Uh,
always the same form over and over.
it is, it's crazy. I mean, it definitely made me, like I was never really, like, against universal healthcare, but I definitely became, like, more for it living in the UK.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the NHS is, like, hardly a perfect system. It's very underfunded, but it's a lot better than the American system.
So how did you have, insurance in Scotland? Does every student has it automatically when they come?
Yeah, well, so the way it works in the UK is basically well, I mean, there are some people who are, like who really hate immigrants and stuff who are, like, trying to change this, but mostly it's if you're a person, you will receive healthcare, or you're
Okay,
at least supposed to because of they have universal healthcare.
okay.
Um, as part of a student visa, you have to pay a fee to be on the universal health care. But that's basically, it's like a flat fee and it's supposed to subsidize the healthcare system. It's like a way the
Mm-hmm.
government makes money. But even that amount of money, which was supposed to be like not just paying for my healthcare, but like subsidizing other people's healthcare, was still way, way less than like my mom was paying for me for healthcare in the US.
Yeah, right.
Um,
But mm-hmm.
I mean, unfortunately, I had to keep my American healthcare going so that like because I would be home for like a couple months each year,
Right. You want to have it just in
family and stuff,
case.
I still have to have it. Like, what was really awful is there was this girl who I knew during my master's who was American who basically couldn't go back to the US, partially because this was during the pandemic where, the chances that you're going to get really sick and end up in hospital
Yeah.
way higher, who couldn't go home because she couldn't afford to get supplemental health insurance for being in the US,
Oh man, yeah.
which is just awful.
How long was it in between your masters, or like between England and Scotland?
Well, basically, it's all a bit complicated because during the last like month or two of my undergrad, COVID hit.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, so prolonged my stay in Scotland a little bit. I actually moved in with my then boyfriend, now husband, because it was a choice of like move in together or possibly be separated forever.
Yeah, yeah.
We made the right decision, but like it was dramatic.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
So we stayed in Scotland for a little bit longer, and then I went back to the US for a little while to visit family, but like maybe like 8 weeks, and then I went back to the
Mm-hmm.
UK. And so my master's was in Canterbury, in
Mm-hmm.
England, and I did like have a room there, but I actually spent a lot of the time that year with my husband's family.
Okay.
Because all my classes ended up being online, and a
Right.
completely empty university campus is a really great
Mm-hmm.
place to be. And my husband was still finishing up his undergrad, and a lot of his classes were online too. So
Okay.
we spent some time in like his parents' place in London, but right at the start of the pandemic, they bought a place in Hastings. Um, which like wasn't renovated at all. It was a super super old house, and I was so glad they bought it because their place in London is lovely, but did not have room for enough like for everyone
Right. I'm
who would want to be staying.
imagining
Yeah,
it's really tiny.
yeah, it is. I mean, it's a very nice house, but like, um, my to give you an idea, like my husband's childhood bedroom has like a very narrow twin bed in it, and you can just about stand next to it with the door closed.
Yeah. Yeah, I
But
can
like two
imagine.
people
Yeah.
cannot sleep in that
Tiny,
bed.
small.
Yeah, no, like when we stayed with them a bit during the pandemic, and like I was sleeping in my husband's parents' office, which was not a tenable situation because his mom is like a lawyer for the government and his dad is a doctor, not doing stuff directly related to COVID, but let's just say they were both very busy.
Yeah.
Um and needed that home office.
Oh,
Right, but
I
what I was
see.
gonna say, so we mostly spent most of the time during the pandemic in Hastings,
Okay.
even though my master's was in Canterbury. So I would say, I mean, I basically lived there continuously, right, from my undergrad to my
Right.
master's. I went home in between, but there like was never a time where I didn't have a UK visa, if you know what I mean.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was your decision then of going back to the US?
Yeah. So basically, I didn't actually know that there was a like very new program that because I did a master's would have allowed me to stay in the UK and work.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't aware of it. So
Okay.
we, and there are times where I regret not having been aware of it. But
Okay.
so we moved to the US. Basically, the thinking at the time, so my husband ended up not really going into academia, but the thinking at the time was that he was going to go into academia.
Okay.
Um, and he's going to do a master's, and if you're going to like work in academia, the US is arguably a little bit better for that, and I'm very interested in politics and specifically American politics, so I
Mm-hmm.
sort of wanted to be in the US for that.
Okay.
So we were thinking, okay, like I'll work in the US and You don't need to get a visa because you won't need to get like an additional visa because you're in school, and that comes with a visa if you just get in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so he did a master's in here in Chicago, and that's why we moved to Chicago. Uh,
Ah, okay.
yeah. So basically, like he came to the U.S. for me, but I came to Chicago for him. But I love Chicago as a city, so I was really glad
Uh-huh.
we ended
Yeah.
up
Yeah, it's a fun
there.
city. So the whole, because he's British, so I'm just always thinking when I'm talking to people with relationships from two different places, it's like marriage comes up really quickly.
Yeah,
Yeah, so, and since your husband was not American,
yeah.
it was,
Yeah, I mean, we basically like near the end of his masters, we were like, okay, so we definitely want to get married. We should get married quickly because we also need to do all the visa stuff that has to do with getting
yeah.
married. Because and it was a complicated case because he needed to transfer from like student visa stuff and then the extension you get to work after grad school in the US to like the being married to me visa, and all of that is still ongoing, and
Oh,
there were lawyers fees and so
right.
many friggin' forms, and the poor guy still can't go back to the UK and visit his family and
Oh
then come back
no,
here.
it's
It's
still not, they
horrible.
take so long.
They take so long. Like genuine advice for anyone who marries someone from another country, like hire your immigration lawyer immediately. Um
Okay.
we actually had a difficult time finding one, and we almost did the wrong things. So like get a lawyer. You need a lawyer. And we tried to do a lot of the forms ourselves and it ended up going okay, I think. Like I don't think we're like it seems like everything's going to be approved on knock on wood. It's not final.
Yeah.
There it's unlikely to go like horribly wrong, but it did take a lot longer. So I would advise people like if you can afford it, just have the lawyer do everything.
Uh-huh.
Well, it will save you so much like difficulty. Like honestly, like we've been through a pandemic together and the toughest thing for our relationship was the forms for the
I
visa.
bet.
Yeah.
But does he have like a work authorization at
Yeah, yeah,
least?
no, so he can work, like, within the
Okay.
bounds of the United States, it's equivalent to being on a green card, but he hasn't gotten the parole permission thing to, like, go visit family
Right. He's not
yet.
a free man.
Yeah, it's terrible. The US immigration system is awful, and I mean, like, we're best case scenario, right? We're like it's not like an instance where, like, one of us is a refugee or,
Right.
like, coming from a lot of poverty or
Yeah,
from a
yeah.
country that the US isn't allied with. This is someone who came here like on a student visa to a prestigious university and married an American and is from an allied country and they're still doing all this. So
Yeah.
like,
It should be like a quick no-brainer,
yeah,
kinda. Yeah.
it's not. It's really, really not. Yeah, like it will be fine, but it was incredibly stressful. I mean, his permission to work came in like the day before like a couple days before his permission to work from his student visa expired.
How stressful is that?
It was incredibly
Oh
stressful.
my god.
It's terrible.
I
Yeah.
think they do it on purpose.
I don't know. Yeah, the it's really really unpleasant.
Yeah. Okay, so once all that paperwork is through, would you consider going back to the UK?
Maybe, but that's a whole other set of paperwork and lawyers and visas.
Right.
Because once we were here and we knew we were going to be together forever, we were basically like, okay, do we want to be in the US or the UK? Because unfortunately, we were dealing with all of that like while I was unemployed too,
Mm,
which was awful. My first job out of my master's was terrible. Never be the first hire at a nonprofit.
okay.
Um, yeah, no, seriously. genuine advice for listeners: have the first place you work have an HR department.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
it wasn't the first job I ever had, but like it was the first job I had where I wasn't like like a student working a summer job.
The first like serious job.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
terrible. Anyway, right. So we were thinking about it, and the thing is, basically, we're in a situation where for the US, there's income requirements to sponsor someone. But you can get a family member to like co-sponsor someone's immigration. So I wasn't making enough money at the time
Mm-hmm.
to sponsor my husband, but my mom was like, okay, yeah, I mean, he's not going to end up being a financial burden, and you make sense together, and like, yeah, so she signed on to
Yeah, she said.
sponsor.
Mm-hmm.
But in the UK, you can't do that, and you have to prove that
Uh,
you've been making a certain amount of income, which I think is even higher than the US for a certain length of time. Um,
okay.
and it's like it's a lot of money. Like a lot of money. Like you can be in a position where you're doing okay financially and it's still not enough money.
Mm.
I can't remember the exact numbers. And you technically can do it off savings, but it has to be like it's a really high number for savings. And the savings have to be all in the name of the person who's sponsoring for a long time. And you can't get co sponsors. Um, and we're both relatively young. And like he was a student at the time, and I had just graduated. And so like it was not financially tenable to do the going to the UK thing for him to sponsor me there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like that becoming something that's like financially possible is still pretty distant for us. Like if I got a really good job offer in the UK and he didn't have to sponsor me, sure,
Okay, yeah.
that'd be great. I would move back to the UK. I like it here. I mean, I really like Chicago specifically, and so does my husband. Um, but no, I mean, we'd be open to moving back to the UK someday, but it's just like it's financially and legally complicated. I do not
Okay.
want to go through immigration stuff like another
Anytime
time.
soon.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's the
that's
whole
understandable.
thing.
You're still in it, still in
Yeah,
the process,
it's
the other
terrible.
way around. And how was your reverse culture shock when you first came back to Chicago?
I mean, it was super weird. I mean, I'm not originally from Chicago, so it's
Right.
moving to a really different part of the country too. Um, I don't know, it's really weird. I mean, it feels like a very different America than the one I left, but, like,
Mm,
I mean, I was out of the country. I mean, I came back for vacations and stuff, but I didn't live in the country for the entire Trump administration and much of the pandemic, so it
yeah.
is a different country than what I left, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's weird, honestly. I would say, like, the main things that have been, like, the reverse culture shock are, like I mean, honestly, the healthcare system is a huge one.
Hmm.
And then the other one is like, I feel like people here are more workaholics than in the UK.
Okay, yeah. There's a different work and life balance.
Yeah, like Americans, I think a lot of them are like kind of workaholics. But I think some of that might just be the fact that like I was in college when I was in the UK, so people were a little bit more chill. Um, but I mean, I work at a university now, and it's very different than the university I went to.
Okay. I hear that a lot, that mostly from people who are from America and they moved to Europe. They said like the work and life balance in Europe is more chill because like
Yeah,
at 4 o'clock they go home and then the workday is over.
yeah, I
Versus,
wouldn't say it's like 4 o'clock in the UK, but no, but I think it is more of like there's a certain level of more like workaholicness, but I don't know. I mean, there's some nice things like um people are pretty like friendly and outgoing here. I mean, part of that is like it's the Midwest, so it's like a part of the US that's like notorious for that, right?
yeah,
Like it's more than where I grew up, right on the East Coast.
right.
Oh, and then the other thing is the public transit isn't as good.
Yeah, but you're in Chicago. You are,
Yeah,
I would
no, with
say, like you're still in the top three
oh yeah,
places. Yeah.
yeah, within the city, it's good. Although I live on the south side, and if I want to get to other places on the south side, it's a nightmare. Like I have to go through downtown.
Okay, that's like I don't know, takes some time, I guess.
Yeah, no,
I'm
it
not
takes
that familiar with Chicago. I've been there once, and that's a long time ago.
yeah, yeah. And then also, but it's mainly like if I want to go to like a small town that's like, 50 miles outside the city, it's much harder here than it would be in the UK, right?
Mm.
Um, like in the parts of Scotland I was living in, like even really small towns, a lot of the time had bus access and things in a way where there isn't really here.
Yeah, I mean, especially in the suburbs, there is you have to you have to have a car just to get to the bus stop.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm still like in the process of learning how to drive. And I mean, it doesn't make
Okay.
in the neighborhood where we live in Chicago, it doesn't make financial sense to drive or to own a car.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a weird thing like when we go on vacation. Um, you know. But it's funny though because we've gotten really into like taking Amtrak places. Uh
Uh-huh.
because we both really enjoy like long train rides and stuff. But it's very funny because we went to like about a year ago we went to St. Joseph, Michigan, which is a lovely little town on Lake Michigan and is
Mm-hmm.
accessible by train. Um, but I think they expect you to, even if you come by train, to like rent a car because
Okay.
we got in there and it's definitely walking distance from the train station to our hotel. Like it was like a
Uh-huh.
15-minute walk. And it was raining, but it's like, well, it's okay. We're going to somewhere warm and
Yeah.
dry, right? You just get wet.
Yeah.
I think that's also part of like the UK is like you just dress
Yeah.
for the
It's
weather and you
okay.
deal with it,
It's just
right?
water.
It's just water, right? Like,
Yeah.
but we showed up, right, at, like, the hotel check-in desk with just, like, backpacks, having been in the rain with no car, and they were like, "Are you okay?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Like,
"No, we're
what
good.
have you done?
We're here. Everything's fine." Like
Yeah.
and, like, this has happened too, like, where we've gone to places by train where we're, like, staying in a place that's technically a motel because a lot of, like, more affordable hotels are motels here, right? And they're like I have to tell and they're always like they always try and give you the, like, sticker for your car or tell you where to park, like, 5 times.
Right. Right.
They'll be
Right.
like,
Yeah.
"We don't have a car. You don't have to tell us where to put the car. We do not have a car."
Yes,
Like,
and then they give you that paper where you have to fill out the license plate.
it's like, "We don't have a car.
Yeah.
We took the train here."
But is it also a lot more expensive in the US to travel by train, isn't it? I've
No, honestly,
No?
British trains are really expensive. They did, like, a
Okay.
weird, like, semi-privatization thing.
Uh-huh.
Um, and in the US, you can actually get really good deals on Amtrak, especially, like, in and out of Chicago, because a lot of the trains are really long
Oh,
distance trains.
okay.
Like, the
Maybe you have to live in Chicago.
yeah. No, like, I'm from the East Coast, and Amtrak is, like, more expensive there, but, like no, I mean, we're going, like, from here to Buffalo for 2 people for, like, $100.
That's not bad at all.
Yeah, no, it's really not that bad. Plus, there's a problem here where the trains get delayed constantly, but then you can get your money back from Amtrak. So I haven't paid
Okay.
full price in quite some time because I keep getting vouchers from previous delayed
All right.
trips.
But do you have to transfer? I mean, or do you always take direct trains?
Basically always direct. I mean, the thing is that there aren't that many routes that intersect, especially in this part of the country. So we usually plan around where you can get by train, if that makes sense.
Okay, all right. So you're planning accordingly. You're not gonna take like something complicated.
Yeah, I mean, because the thing is, like, that's one of the issues with the American train system is that, like, there just aren't that many intersections between the train lines, especially in the middle of the country, except in Chicago. Like if you want to get from the West Coast to the East Coast, you're almost inevitably going to have to go through Chicago. Like,
But that
I
is
think
good
it's
for you, so you have more options.
oh yeah, it's great for us. It's
Yeah.
terrible for the rest of the country.
Yeah. Yeah.
Honestly, to take trains in this country, you have to treat it as being about the journey, kind
It's
of a
a
little bit.
yes, exactly. It's an
Unless you're
adventure.
doing like some of the ones on the East Coast that are more efficient and less commonly
Yeah.
delayed and stuff. No, I mean, and the train system in the UK is definitely better. Like it goes to a lot more places. Um,
Mm.
but it's also honestly a lot of the time it is, I think, more expensive. But I think if I was on the East Coast of the US, it would be more comparable.
And just circling back when you were in the UK,
Yeah.
I had this one more question. How did people usually react to you? I mean, you already said like they expected of you that you're really outgoing,
Yeah.
but did they have like a general idea about Americans?
Yeah, I mean, I was in the interesting position of like, so St. Andrews, where I went to college, is like 15% North American students. So
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I was hardly ever the first American someone had met, or even like the first American they interacted with that day necessarily. Um, I mean, there were like stereotypes of like Americans specifically at St. Andrews, which were like that you studied international relations, which I didn't. I studied psychology and modern history.
Uh-huh.
Um, and there were definitely some Americans who like mostly hung out with other Americans, and I absolutely wasn't that. Like only a couple of my friends from college are American. Um, but like, I mean, I think that that was sort of like the main things people assumed about Americans. I guess specifically for like American students at St. Andrews, they sort of assumed you had money. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not a totally unfair assumption because St. Andrews is a wonderful university, but is not great about scholarships for foreign students.
Okay.
Like there are a lot of scholarships, like and different like pricing structures, and the loan system works differently and everything if you are British or even European. But if you're from the rest of the world, there just aren't that many scholarships that would
Okay.
allow you to go to St. Andrews that you're eligible for. So I would say that's sort of the main thing. I guess also like people expect Americans to like dress a certain way that's different than Brits.
Uh-huh.
But I mean a lot of this is true. Like the whole like wearing leggings and like athletic gear when you're not going to the gym is much
Mm-hmm.
more common among
Yeah.
Americans than it is among like people in the UK, or at least people at St. Andrews.
Mm-hmm. Athleisure.
Yeah, athleisure stuff,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, so I would say those are sort of the main things. I mean, it was definitely interesting to be there during like the 2016 election.
I bet. Because I
Yeah.
mean, did you get a lot of confrontation about like, hey, how
No,
did
I mean,
they vote like that?
no, it's not really confrontation. Like during the election, it was mostly like Brits mocking the Americans.
Yeah.
But once it happened, there was mostly a level of like, I'm sorry, are you okay?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Um, yeah, which was interesting.
But
It
was it kind of overwhelming? I mean, that reaction, I mean, that you got that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't find it that overwhelming. I think because there were enough Americans there that we sort of shared the load, right?
Right.
Um, and it all felt extremely surreal because like after the 2016 election, I mean that was in November and I didn't go home until December, right? Fairly late December because of when the vacations were. Um and it was so strange like when my plane touched down in Boston, I was like it's still here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um um yeah, it was odd, honestly. But like it was also funny because like I constantly had this thing of like when I was in the UK, people would ask me to explain Trump, and when I was in the US, people would ask me to explain Brexit.
Right.
Um,
Right.
yeah, and I mean, I have a YouTube channel about political psychology, so I can go into depth about these things. But the answer to both is mostly racism. Um,
Okay. What is the name of your YouTube channel?
Political psych with Abby.
Okay. And I make sure that I will put this in the show notes that everybody can check this out.
Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. It's
Yeah,
interesting stuff. I really enjoyed the environmental anxiety episode.
thank you. Um,
Yeah, but because like when I for example read comments about Americans in the Expat channel in or the subreddit,
mm,
and it is always politically, like everybody, like when they say, oh yeah, I'm gonna leave America, I live in Europe, it is always just about political reasons.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't that for me. That's not why I left. I mean, I'm one of those try and stay and make it better until you have to run people.
Uh-huh.
Um, and by until you have to run, that is something I keep track of. My family is European Jewish. And
Mm-hmm.
like my grandmother fled the Nazis. So
Mm-hmm.
like um I can tell you I know exactly where my passport is at all times.
Okay.
Yeah. But um what was I gonna say? No, I mean I didn't move for political reasons. And there's this whole issue of like I think people think like, oh, if you don't love it, you can leave it. But like it is actually really hard to immigrate to a different country.
Yeah.
I mean, like I had an easier situation than most, right? Because I was like on a student visa. Which is one of the, at least if you're from like a allied country, one of the easier visas to get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess, yes.
But like it is genuinely hard to move to a different country for most people, right? So yeah, I mean, I didn't move for political reasons. It's funny though because like a lot of things in the UK are really politically bad, especially like since I moved back to the I mean, it'd been going downhill for a long time, but
Mm-hmm.
like since I moved back to the US, it's funny, like I used to apologize to my husband. I'm like, I'm sorry I brought you to this country. It's going crazy. But now I'm like, you know what? I'm getting news from the UK. I'm not sorry anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think that too. It's like, especially in Europe, like the political climate is bad in most places. It just gets
Yeah,
worse
I
and
think
worse
people just
lately.
a lot of the time people don't realize, right? Like there are things that are better in the UK politically, right? Like they have gun control, they have universal health care, these sorts of things, but
Mm-hmm.
like their politics is trending into some like frighteningly rightward directions right now, and like the
Yeah.
limitations they have on protest there and that sort of thing is like really upsetting.
Yeah.
They're dismantling a lot of their environmental policies. Like things
That's
are not
scary.
going well
Yeah.
in UK politics right now. But I think the issue is like a lot of Americans, and this isn't really like individuals' faults. A lot of it has to do with like media coverage and things. A lot of Americans are really not aware of what's happening in the rest of the world politically.
Yeah. I mean, it's
So I
true.
guess yeah, I
It's
guess there's this idea like at least about like most countries in like Western Europe where you just sort of assume, well, it must be better there because I'm not hearing about it.
Yeah, but exactly, it's true. Like the media coverage is really limited on unless something really bad happens or
Yeah,
something really big happens.
yeah.
Versus like the other way around, I feel in Europe people always know what's going on here.
Oh, yeah. No, I have a friend from college who's from South Africa. And she was just like, I'm just so sick of hearing American news. Like, it doesn't affect me. And I mean, it doesn't affect me that much. And there's not very much I can do about it. And I just want to be paying attention to the news that's like, of what's like happening in my home country, which I can actually like affect and do things about. And I'm like, that's totally fair. I mean, like, to some extent what happens in America like does affect everywhere, right? But it shouldn't be the duty of random people half a world away to know or care about what's
Yeah,
happening in American
it's
politics that much, right? Like
yeah, it's funny. Like we watch and sometimes we watch like the German equivalent of John Oliver here,
yeah,
like satire shows.
yeah,
And a lot of times it's American topics. It's like
yeah,
American politics. And I'm like, okay. I already
yeah,
heard that in English. Now I can listen to it again in German.
yeah. I think part of that is like that American culture is so influential globally, right? Um
Yeah.
And it's funny because like I'll have people be like, and like friends who aren't native English speakers, they'll be like, "Your accent is so easy to understand because you sound like TV."
Yeah. Yeah, true. Yes, this is how it sounds. That's true.
I mean, Americans will describe my accent as chronic NPR voice, but
Oh, that's a, that's a compliment.
yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. um, But since you're back in the US, is there anything that you miss from the UK?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I miss really old stuff. Like I'm a huge history geek.
Okay.
And there's some really cool old stuff in the US. Because there's like, really fascinating stuff from like Native American cultures and stuff, but like a lot of that's not as well preserved.
Mm.
Um, so I miss a lot of the really old buildings and stuff. So I miss that kind of thing. I miss savory pies. Like that's a big thing that I miss
Okay.
food wise.
Okay. Hey,
Like
Thanksgiving is coming up. Maybe you
yeah,
should make like a savory one.
chicken and mushroom pie. Like that's not really something
Mm.
you get here as much. I mean, I miss fish and chips. I mean, I miss fish a lot, but I think that's like just living in the Midwest, having lived on coasts my whole life.
Right. But I
Um,
guess you can. I mean, I was just thinking like you can get that anywhere, but maybe not in Chicago. I don't
I mean, you
know.
can get lake fish and like you can get frozen salmon. I have frozen. I mean, I obviously I cooked it, but like I had frozen salmon for dinner tonight.
Yeah.
But like more fish and like fresher fish is not really something
Mm.
you can get as much. So I guess those are sort of the main things. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there are definitely. I think it's mostly people I miss, like specific friends of
Okay.
mine and stuff
Yeah.
there. Um, yeah, I would say it's mostly like people. Yeah, yeah. Oh, and obviously the good public transit I miss.
Yeah. Okay. Hmm.
Yeah, but I would say that's sort of the main stuff.
One of my first episodes I made, I also had an American woman. She moved to England, and she said the a thing that she cannot get used to it, that the British people always run into you. They don't look where they're going.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I really had that issue so much. I mean, I'm very clumsy, so I run into people sometimes wherever I am. Um, and my husband and I tend to bump into each other a lot, but I'm very clumsy and he has dyspraxia, so I don't think that's really a cultural thing. Uh,
Okay. I thought I thought like you had that experience too because I never heard of that before.
No, I don't really think so, as much. I mean, it probably depends on, like, where in the UK you're living. I don't know. It's not really an experience I had. When I was living in Scotland, I mean, like, I was in a pretty small town, so there tended to be a fair amount of space. And then I was living in England, but during a global pandemic where people
Mm.
were social
Were they not
distancing,
inside? Yes.
people were not really bumping into each other very much.
Right.
I will say the worst thing in terms of like people being in my way that I experienced when I was in the UK is that St. Andrews has like a very famous golf course. I think it might be like the oldest in the world or something.
Oh, okay.
And golf tourists are the world's worst tourists. And I say that as someone who's worked in the tourism industry.
Uh-huh.
Um, and they would stand like on fairly narrow sidewalks with their golf bags sideways, just like blocking the entire sidewalk while people
Okay.
were trying to get to class. But like those were mostly not Brits. Like a ton of those were like Americans.
Okay. It's just the
Yeah.
bulky bags. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for being on my podcast.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah. Hope you do really well on your YouTube channel.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
just got to I got to over 1,000 subscribers a
Oh,
couple of
that's
months
awesome.
ago. So it's
That
exciting.
is.
Yeah,
Congratulations. That's a big
yeah.
achievement.
Yeah, I think the next one's going to be about the dangers of looking at politics in terms of polarization. So I don't know if that'll be out before this episode comes out.
Probably. I will. I will probably take it. Yeah, that was Abby's experience of studying in the UK and moving back to the US as an adult and bringing back a husband that also needs a lot of paperwork, which is never fun. Yeah, make sure to check out her YouTube channel that you can find in the show notes. And yeah, I will be back with a new episode next Thursday. Until then, you can find all other episodes wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you like this show, please leave a good review. And yeah, also feel free to reach out at worldscollide123pod@gmail.com. Or you can also find me on Instagram, Worlds Collide Pod, one word. Maybe you also want to tell me your story. And I also want to say thank you to Serge Quarando for the music. You will hear from me next week. Bye bye. See you soon. Hear you soon.